I'm Anthony Harris from Pearl River Valley Electric Power Association in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from NRECA's professional communities, which empower electric co-op employees from across the U.S. to learn from each other and share valuable work resources. Learn more about this exclusive benefit for NRECA voting members at cooperative.com/community.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm Molly Christian, guest hosting for Scott Hoffman. Rooftop solar is gaining popularity with homeowners and businesses, leading to a surge in installations over the past decade. But the technology isn't right for everyone, and electric co-ops are doing their part to help consumer members make informed decisions and avoid misleading or inaccurate information from some third-party vendors. For this episode, I'll talk to Neal Brown with Garkane Energy in Utah on a tool the co-op is providing members who are thinking about solar panels.
So we found there was a lot of misinformation going around about solar and solar companies spreading different information that wasn't accurate. So we created a quiz online that they had to pass with 100% accuracy. So they knew all the solar information before they were jumping ahead and getting involved in something they didn't fully understand.
First, I'll talk with Lidija Sekaric, Vice President of Innovation and Emerging Technology at NRECA, on what consumers should consider before investing in rooftop solar and how co-ops can be a resource for them. Lidija, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Molly. Happy to be here.
So rooftop solar can be a good addition for some households and businesses, but it's important to weigh the costs and the benefits. How can co-ops protect their members and help them make informed decisions on whether to add rooftop solar?
Yeah, first I want to agree with you. Rooftop solar can be a great investment for a range of reasons, whatever the motivation might be. Reducing electricity bills, locking in a certain electricity price if possible, reducing carbon footprint, supporting the grid, any number of things. I think one of the things that maybe most consumers underappreciate is that rooftop solar can be a complex product, both to sell and to understand and buy, right? And I think because of that, co-ops who are in the business of electricity can really, really help educate the members along the lines of many different things on the policies that impact the value and the availability of rooftop solar, the difference between different purchasing mechanisms, whether they are loans, leases, buying them outright, and also the kind of system you want. How large of a system does the average homeowner needs, right? But it's a number of issues that I think somebody who is in the electricity business can really support the consumer, helping assess a number of other things like future additions to the home that could be EVs or heat pumps, going away from, let's say, gas towards more electricity and so on.
What are some other tips that co-ops can pass to their members to help them make educated decisions, including with respect to choosing a vendor or installer and making sure they are a reliable partner to work with?
I think there's a set of fairly simple, straightforward recommendations that would apply to any purchase in this space. At the minimum, check the company that is trying to sell against the Better Business Bureau website and see if there are any malpractices in the past. I would say get at least 3 quotes because that can be really educational in terms of the pricing you get, in terms of the assumptions that the installers are making, and we'll get to those in a second, and really understand that quote, understand what each one of the lines means, how they're taking into account your electricity production, what some of the recommendations in general really would be, understand what the assumptions are and why they're made, right? And we can get into some of those, what they are, but here's a simple one. One of them is that price of electricity will keep going up at a certain rate. There really is nobody than your utility, your co-op, who knows better whether or not that assumption is wildly different from the reality. So that's an example of something that might determine if the installer wants to keep escalating the price of the solar product or if it's going to keep it constant, and so on and so forth. Understanding where some of the other finer market transactions might be in renewable energy credits, for example, which is a product that people outside of the energy industry may not understand. So co-ops can really help at least educate the consumers on the basic facts, but the consumer really truly needs to demand full clarity of any offer that they're getting.
And Lidija, as you said, state and federal policies can have a big impact on the affordability and benefits of rooftop solar, including if there are incentives or tax credits for that. Explain why policies can have a big impact on the attractiveness of rooftop solar and why co-ops are a good resource for understanding those policies.
Yes, absolutely. So the primary mechanism for monetizing rooftop solar electricity that is produced on your home that actually goes back to the grid, unless you happen to have a battery that can be stored locally, is through a mechanism called net metering, where you are rewarded for the production at a certain rate. The return on investment or financial sensibility of that investment in general can be heavily dependent on what that rate is. Does it apply to everybody in the state? Does it apply to the co-op? What are the potential changes? That's just an example of a statewide policy that acutely impacts the investment in rooftop solar. There are tax incentives in some cases. There are changes to electricity rates that may or may not be applicable to the co-op, that might change how much your future bill might be happening. So rates, time of use rates, overall rates. And those are some of the things that I think because the co-op themselves being in that business can sometimes, even if they're not regulated, it impacts their surrounding, their entire ecosystem, can be a great resource to understand things. The other reason I think it's important to have some level of education is that these policies are changing all the time. And on occasion, unfortunately, and I do want to say that most people in the solar business out there, they are not out there to intentionally swindle a consumer. However, there's a range of tactics, and some of those sales tactics in the past, from what I've heard, have included rushing the customers to make a decision based on a potential policy change, right? So as an example, right now, in the tax bill that's going through the Congress at the moment, there are proposed changes to how third-party installers can claim or cannot claim tax credit for solar anymore, right? That's something that would definitely directly impact third-party solar sales going forward. As an example of something that could be given as a, make a decision now because this won't be available later, that can happen along the way for a number of reasons. And it's always really good to get somebody who is following policies that are impacting energy space to interpret that and say, how likely is this to happen? What does it mean? Does anybody get grandfathered? Does it impact other ways of purchasing solar? And any number of things.
So rooftop solar panels are a long-term investment and something that a consumer or a household can have for decades. And they often involve service agreements to maintain the panels. What kind of things should go into those agreements or contracts to give certainty to consumers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Molly. So generally speaking, the type of contract is going to differ based on whether that the ownership, this is what the third-party sales are, the ownership of the system is retained by somebody else. And in those cases, those companies will in fact say, we will be around for so many decades to maintain the system and ultimately dispose of it if needed. Rooftop solar business is, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively new segment. So it's valid to ask what happens if you're not around. So as an example, looking at a clause in the contract that says, what happens if you divest or you're bought by somebody else or you go bankrupt? Like who takes over the responsibility for billing or for servicing? There is, as an example, I live in a state that does not allow third-party solar. So the way I purchased the panels on my home actually ended up being through a neighborhood co-op, like as a group buy, right? And in that case, I'm really on my own to seek services. And there are certain marketplaces that a consumer can look for a potential servicing agreement that may be needed later. As it happens, luckily, rooftop solar does not need a lot of servicing. Typically, most of the issues I think that a consumer might find are contained and could be related to the quality of the work up front, right? So it does interact with the roof, make sure that that seal is good, that it doesn't damage the roof and so on. And that can also be codified as a guarantee of labor for a certain amount of time, for a year, 2 years, or whatever that is. So some of those terms are going to depend on the actual contractual relationship and the purchasing mechanism. But I think whatever might occur to you, what will happen to this system over the decades, what will happen to my relationship with this seller over the decades is a valid question to ask, and if possible, put in a contract.
Lidija, any other closing points you want to make, whether it's advice for co-ops and how they can help their members or advice for consumers who might be considering these investments? Just any other closing points or things we didn't go over?
Yeah, so I am a technologist at heart, and so new advancements and possibilities in technology do excite me quite a bit. I did want to bring this up because there is a common misconception that if you have solar panels on your roof, you will be able to have electricity when the power goes out. As I mentioned earlier, panels are typically hooked to the grid. They export the power to the grid. And so unless there's a special configuration of certain elements that convert that electricity so that at the moment you could potentially power your home. Another very popular trend that is arising, and I think is very interesting for a range of reasons, is adding batteries to that solar. So the actual charging of the batteries does not happen. You don't have to draw from the grid. You are preserving some of the power that is generated locally. And what is happening among a number of utilities, and I think some of the co-ops are absolute leaders on this, is using those batteries then to help support the grid. Admittedly, that's a part of the portfolio that our group in BTS also works on, but I've also seen really interestingly structured programs where co-ops are helping their consumers install these batteries, whether financially or technically, and then help both offset the cost through interaction with the grid and help support the grid. Why is that important? It's important because, we're heading into the season where the demand is high for electricity. We're heading into overall economically higher demand for electricity for a number of reasons. But this is something that has been in the last maybe decade or so because of the dropping price of batteries and some other tax incentives, it has been a relatively popular thing to add in certain parts of the country. So I just wanted to flag that. And I know we could have a whole podcast on that topic and we'll probably stop there.
Yeah, it's such a technical but important topic, and it's a big emerging technology that our consumers are looking at. Lidija, thanks so much for joining us and giving us just a sliver of your knowledge on this. Thanks so much and have a great day.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll talk about how one co-op in Utah is helping customers make smart decisions on rooftop solar.
Along Those Lines podcast is made possible by NRECA's professional communities, which offer a private space for voting member co-op employees and directors to connect with and learn from each other. Join the more than 13,000 helpful co-op staff who make the communities an invaluable place to connect, grow, and get things done each day. Learn more about this exclusive benefit for NRECA voting members at cooperative.com/community.
I'm Amy Howitt from Ohio's Electric Cooperatives in Columbus, Ohio. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back. Next, we'll hear from Neal Brown, Marketing and Member Services Manager for Garkane Energy in Kanab, Utah. Neal will tell us about a smart way the co-op is supporting members who are weighing rooftop solar. Neal, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So Garkane created a tool, I believe in 2023, to help its members decide whether rooftop solar panels are right for them. Tell us about this tool and how it works.
Yeah, so we found there was a lot of misinformation going around about solar and solar companies spreading different information that wasn't accurate. So we created a quiz online that they had to pass with 100% accuracy. So they knew all the solar information before they were jumping ahead and getting involved in something they didn't fully understand.
And Neal, maybe walk us through some of the questions on this quiz, the kind of things that people need to answer when they're considering whether to add solar panels.
Yeah, so the very first question we ask on the quiz is, will installing solar on my roof get rid of my power bill? I feel like that's one of the major discrepancies in the education they have. And I think the solar companies like to tell people that they won't have a power bill anymore. And unless they're going totally off grid, they'll still have a power bill. So that's the first question we ask. The second one is whether their panels need to be inspected by the county and by Garkane, and they do. Sometimes they'll have friends or cousins install them, but they do need to be inspected for safety reasons. And then another big question is where to turn if they have technical issues. We're in a rural area. We don't have any solar companies based in our area. So companies will come from the outside, make a sale, and then move on. So they always come to the co-op for questions. We, of course, point them back to the solar provider for any fixes or for maintenance. The co-op is not responsible. We'd like to help, of course, but we don't have all the information on all the products out there. We do have an FAQ on the website right next to the quiz where it goes over the benefits and things to look for. We also have an installer quiz that if they're going to install on our system, the installer has to pass that quiz too. So they know all the technical aspects of our system, make sure they install it safely and according to county specs and things like that.
You went over this a little bit, but tell us why you launched this quiz. I know it was partly to help members identify incomplete or maybe misleading info from some solar vendors. So just explain to us kind of what the context is and why you felt compelled to create this quiz.
So yeah, we had talked a lot about how to solve that problem for a while, and we would provide more info on our website, more terms and conditions on the application, communicating on social media and in our newsletters, but it just wasn't really getting to the members like we wanted. And we had one specific incident that propelled us to make a big change. We had one solar company that was trying to make a sale, and they were trying to get financing for the member through a bank. They ended up forging one of our meter tech's approval letters. They wrote it out, forged our signature, gave it to the bank. So the bank approved it and they installed it, and the member really had no idea what they were doing. And so they were in this litigious battle with the bank about the financing. And then that's how we found out about the letter. And they're like, wow, we got to really do something to prevent this from happening again. So that's what kind of launched us to essentially force the education by having them pass that quiz.
And what kind of problems can arise for co-ops and their members if someone doesn't make an educated decision on the technology or it's not right for them? What can happen?
Well, it is a major investment. It's anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 to install solar. If they're doing battery backup, it's probably double that. So just from a financial side, it could be a big problem, but also safety if they're not doing it the right way. And we always joke that everyone has a brother-in-law or a father-in-law that can install solar for them, but they're not always accredited or licensed. And so if they don't do it right, it can cause a major safety issue. Even when our linemen go to disconnect power, or if there's a power outage, it can backfeed onto the system. So, major financial concerns and safety concerns. And so this is one issue where we thought we got to get involved early in the process so the members know they can trust us and not rely on third-party information.
Has Garkane's quiz been successful? Tell us what the results of this initiative have been.
I think it's been very successful because, one, it sends the message that we care and that we're a trusted source for information. And so if the members essentially don't like another step in the process, at least they get the message that the co-op cares about them and that we don't have really ulterior motive either way, but we do care that they're making good decisions when it's based on their energy sources. So in that way, I think it's been hugely successful. And we've had members tell us that they appreciated us requiring the information from them and not just sending them to the solar companies. And in the last year or so, we haven't had any major issues with solar companies signing the applications for them and making sure they know what they're getting into. And so I think from that aspect, it's been a huge success.
Yeah, it sounds like a really smart way to engage consumers and offer more value as a co-op to help them make these decisions. Any other tips on what co-ops can do to help their members make smart choices on rooftop solar? Anything we didn't go over with either the quiz or other kind of outreach you do?
I think we are trusted by our members. And so I think if co-ops can leverage that trust by getting ahead of the process early before any contracts are signed, however they do that, we chose to do this quiz for that purpose, but I think there's other ways to do that depending on co-ops situations, but leverage that trust that we have with our members. I know internet's an easy source to get information, but it's not always accurate for specific areas. I think leading up to it, whether they can communicate that the cooperative is their trusted source for information on all energy issues, not only solar, but I think uniquely with solar, that just be the trusted source for information. I think that is one thing that co-ops can do.
This was great. This is a really good rundown of what a consumer member would need to consider, and great advice for co-ops too if they're dealing with similar issues. So Neal, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure and grateful that you're having me on.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and our sponsor, NRECA's Professional Communities. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us at electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Molly Christian.
I'm Erin Steed from Farmers Electric Cooperative in Greenville, Texas. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.